Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Welcome, a very warm welcome to the Words, Ideas, and Thinkers Festival, WIT Festival. This is our second year. We are absolutely thrilled to be back and presenting to this marvelous audience that always shows up from the Berkshires. My name is Marie Arana, and I am the president of the Authors Guild Foundation Board. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It is a super incredible honor for me to be involved with the Authors Guild. This is an organization you want to support. It is the oldest and strongest organization that works on behalf of writers, providing to them, equipping them with the tools that they need to reach success. And in doing so, the Authors Guild serves readers like you and like me, and people who care about keeping literature alive in this country, about keeping writers writing, about preserving America's very strong literary heritage. So if you're a writer, I hope you will join the Authors Guild, and if you are a reader, I hope you will support it, help fund it. It is an extraordinary institution of many thousands of writers who are actually given real on-hand support by this institution. So thank you for joining us this morning. This is changing the narrative, and I will promise you that with every program that you hear today and tomorrow, you will be hearing about how writers change the narrative, how things are made new in their hands and in their minds, and therefore in yours. So the Authors Guild, if you don't know, has had extraordinary success in the last couple of years. We have defended copyright, we have fought monopolies, we have fought the appropriation of writers' material by online piracy, the actual sort of rape and plundering of the work that writers do and don't get paid for. It's astonishing how often that happens and how much work needs to be done to prevent it from happening in the future. And of course, as you may know, it's been in the press in the last couple of days, there is a class action suit that is being pursued, has just been announced by the Authors Guild against the appropriation of material, the rampant appropriation of material by artificial intelligence. Thank you. Thank you. So I hope that you will enjoy today's program. This is called Who Are the NDNs Anyway, and Why Does It Matter? NDN stands for American Indian, the indigenous people. I'm a proud member of the people who have indigenous roots, but from the other side of the hemisphere, born in Peru, but with very deep connections and very deep sentiments about the North American Indian, the North American original peoples. We're very, very lucky to have two extraordinary individuals, representatives of writing from Native American circles. And there is, in my mind at least, and I hope that they talk about this, an efflorescence of indigenous writing in this country. And it is a marvel, really, to contemplate how, so late in the game, we are beginning to hear these truly remarkable voices and remarkable oral sort of storytelling skills and talents. First, we have Margaret Verble, who is an enrolled citizen of the Cherokee Nation. For generations, her family has had a long history in the tribe's survival. And some of her family still live on the land where her novels are set and from whence her people have come. She was raised in Tennessee, and she lives in Kentucky. Her novel, Maud's Line, was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. Her book, Cherokee America, was rejected 92 times before it was finally published.
I'm glad you mentioned that.
Thank you, Margaret, to considerable acclaim. When Two Feathers Fell from the Sky, another book that's added to her evidence of her remarkable talents. And a book I love, her most recent book, Stealing, which evinces the most timeless voice. It's beautiful, spare prose, and powerful message at its core. Beautiful character construction, and just an incredible story. It has been compared to Ernest Gaines' The Autobiography of Jane Pittman. It's been compared to Elena Maria Viramontes' Under the Feet of Jesus. It has been compared to Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird. So, and I think it's better than all of those. So I recommend it highly.
Oh, I like that.
Thank you, Margaret, for your remarkable work. And then we have Oscar Hokeah, who is also a member of the Cherokee Nation. Oscar is also part Kiowa through his mother, and his father is Mexican from a family that emigrated from Chihuahua, Mexico. So you can tell from this incredibly bifurcated, trifurcated individual that he is going to be interested in intertribal relations, and his work really does show that. He spent 20 years empowering Native American communities in Oklahoma with the Pueblo Indians, the Apache, and the Diné peoples. And so his work actually resonates with all of that sort of multifarious tribal knowledge that he packs. His book, it's a debut novel, his first novel. I can tell there will be many more. Is called Calling for a Blanket Dance, and it tells the eventful story of a young Native American boy making his way through a very divided identity, divided many times over, as Oscar himself is. I rather think that it is, I suspect, a book that arises from a deeply autobiographical seed, just guessing there. It is a marvel, truly recommend it. The subject today is who the NDNs are, how perhaps they change the narrative, which is the subject of this whole festival. And I would ask you to save up your questions. For them, we will come back at about 11:30 to address the questions that you may have. So enjoy, and off we go. Thank you very much.
You want me to start off? You want me to start off?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, well, listen, thank you. So where'd she go?
She's already gone.
Disappeared. All right. Thank you,
Yeah.
Marie. And Oscar and I are glad to be here.
Yeah, super excited to be here, guys.
Yeah, and we were wondering, how many Indians are there in the audience before we... All right, we got an Indian over here, right? What tribe are you? You're Chickasaw. Okay, good. All right, Chippewa. All right, okay, anybody else? Okay, so we've got them outnumbered. Don't you think? There are four of us.
There's four of us.
Yeah, there are four of us here.
Pretty good.
Well, and Marie, let's don't forget these South American Indians. All right, so we've got y'all outnumbered. And let's see, where shall we start? Where do you want to start, Oscar?
Well, we can, there's just so much to talk about. And there's just so many merging points, especially when it comes to, how natives represent in literature today. There's been a bit of this new renaissance, and so there's a good number of us out there writing right now. I mean, we can start talking about sovereignty if you want to,
Yeah.
and just kind of a foundational point. And I don't know if the audience has much education on sovereignty and what that means for Native tribes, especially specifically the federally recognized tribes here in the United States, and then also tribes in Canada as well. So basically, it's a relationship that individual tribes have with the government. So like U.S., like Cherokee Nation has a certain treaty that we have with the United States government, which establishes our sovereignty, and so that's how we determine enrollment. So similar thing happens with tribes in Canada as well. They have similar kind of arrangements, and so I think that that's super important and especially when we're talking about identifying as Cherokee or as Kiowa, because I'm Kiowa and Cherokee, born and raised in Oklahoma. I live there right now. I work for Cherokee Nation. I work for Indian Child Welfare. I'm a social worker, and so I see every day the benefits of sovereignty on Cherokee people, in the Cherokee community, and just how important that element is with regard to Native identity. And I didn't know if Margaret, if you had any insight or wanted to talk about Native identity with regard to anything outside of those parameters, or especially when it comes to the book world, if there's anything there that we should talk about.
Well, I don't know about to the book world, but I think that one thing that a lot of people don't understand is, and this goes to the sovereignty that Oscar's talking about, is that the relationship between the tribes and the United States is a nation-to-nation relationship. And that is important in several ways. And one of the ways that it's important is that there's a lot of infringement, that's an understatement, on tribal sovereignty by states, well, of course, we have a history. The whole history of the country is infringement on tribal nations. And the tribal nations that have survived, and there are over 300 tribal nations that didn't survive, but the tribal nations that did survive have a nation-to-nation relationship with the United States government. This is a relationship that cannot be or should not be mitigated in any way by the states. And, well, in Oklahoma, we're having a terrible trouble.
Oh, yeah, I know.
Trouble with that. Do you want to talk about that just a little bit as an example of problems with sovereignty?
With regard to, like...
the governor.
Okay, yeah. All right, yeah. So we have a governor right now who tends to infringe on our sovereignty. Cherokee, the Native tribes. So there's 39 different tribes in Oklahoma. Cherokee Nation is the largest. Cherokee Nation is the largest tribe in the United States. And so we have a certain relationship. Cherokee Nation does a lot for the community, not just Cherokee people, but everyone who's in the community. So we have a fundamental belief that if everyone in our community, whether they're Cherokee or not, is healthy, then we're all healthy. Like the Cherokee citizens are healthy as well. So Cherokee Nation does a lot contributing to schools on the reservation.
To the tune of about $7 million a year.
Yeah, millions and millions of dollars. And we pump, millions of dollars into the Oklahoma economy as well. But we have, like gaming pacts with the state. And so I think that there is a desire to try to, co-opt some of those resources from Cherokee Nation in order to, I don't know where they're going to get funneled to, but to the state for some capacity or other. But, and we always make the point that, like Cherokee Nation, all the tribes, drive a big chunk of the economy in Oklahoma. And so this individual routinely tries to infringe on our sovereignty. And you might see in the media where that's happening. Sometimes on a national scale, you'll see it. But I think he gets a certain level of attention doing that. And the interesting thing about that is that he's an enrolled Cherokee citizen as well, and so it's kind of a contradiction there. And he's also just recently acquired a tribal liaison, I guess is what the title they're using, but he's Cherokee as well. So I think that there's this. There's an interesting dynamic that's at play with regard to state and tribal governments, as far as it's a battle for resources, is what it is. But that's kind of a broad overview of it.
Although the governor this is Governor Stitt, we're talking about in Oklahoma, is a enrolled member because his great-grandfather, I think it was enrolled, and at the time the Cherokees protested that and tried to get him off of the rolls. And this was during the allotment times. And how many of you know about Indian allotments? Do you know what we're talking about when we talk about allotments? All right, well, let me say something about that. There's many ways to kill Indians. And one of the most inventive ways to do that was to dissolve the tribes as such, to create the state of Oklahoma. And so what they did was that they came in and gave individual Indians allotments, which are basically parcels of land. I think it was 640 acres per adult Indian at the time, and this is about 1907. And so the tribes were dissolved, and these allotments were given to the Indians in Oklahoma. And there were lots and lots and lots of white people that were trying to pretend like they were Indians in order to get this land. And the governor's ancestors were one of those folks. And most of them were prevented from doing that, but some of them were not prevented from doing that. But what happened was that even a bigger issue than that was that by giving the Indians allotments and dissolving the tribal governments, and they dissolved we went for decades and didn't even have a chief, except one appointed. Occasionally, if they needed a chief, the President of the United States would appoint a chief for a day. And the tribes were annihilated. And so if you were when I was growing up, Oscar's younger than I am, but when I was growing up, only the old people in my family or the older generation of my mother's generation, the older people in my mother's generation and the people beyond them, only they were Indians. The ones that were born, the too lates, even if they'd been full-bloods, they wouldn't have been Indians. They would have been considered white people by the United States government. So the plan was to erase the Indians that were enrolled by just letting them die off. And the rolls were closed, so you could not enroll. And so I was not enrolled. The rolls were open again. Our rolls were open again in 1978 or 1979. You're too young to know that.
Well, I was born in 75.
That's so depressing.
Well.
Okay, well, I won't tell you how old I was in 75. But I was enrolled immediately because my mother's first cousin was a tribal attorney. So, we were all he wanted us all to vote for Bill Keeler for chief immediately.
Oh, yeah.
My enrollment number is like 2,150 something. So, but that was, we had to push for decades, even to open the rolls again, so that Oscar could be an Indian. Because if the rolls hadn't been opened again, he couldn't be a Cherokee. I guess could you have been a Kiowa?
I'm not sure what the criteria would have been.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I guess they would have been able to. I mean, I was enrolled Kiowa, whenever I first. So I'm not sure if the Kiowa tribe had a different situation. I'm not sure what that's about.
Yeah, I don't know
enrolled,
anything about their history.
And then later I was enrolled in the Cherokee Nation. Yeah. My mother did that when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You were a kid.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you weren't born a Cherokee because the rolls weren't open.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
So by that federal government standard, definitely.
Yeah, by government standard, by official government standard.
Yeah. So, but I think that, as far as I understood that Cherokee Nation, as far as Cherokee people, with our stomp grounds and the traditional practices that we had with regard to that, it's been continuous. It's never stopped. And then so that would be, within proximity to that kind of involvement with our traditional custom, traditional dances, that continuously brought us together. We were always collectively, and each of those grounds will have, like a spokesperson type of chief type individual. So I think that there was always like a representative. I'm representing a chief type of a person for Cherokee people, even if the federal government wasn't coming in and saying, okay, now you get to, by our authority, we can tell you what you can do. So I think that that's an important element, is that relationship with the United States. That goes back, since prior to the removal. Like Cherokee Nation was one of the, first, or a big part of having negotiations with the United States government. They were a big proponent in the 1800s with regard to trying to negotiate something with the United States government. So this is back before removals, whenever Cherokees were in, like North Carolina, Kentucky, Tennessee area, South Carolina. And so we have a long running relationship with the United States government. And that continues to today. So I think that and with regard to even like having hundreds of years more time interacting with the U.S. governments or even like European colonial powers prior to like Southwest tribes, like we've probably 300-400 years of interactions. And then there are some tribes who may have been interacting with the U.S. government for maybe 150 years. Yeah,
I think our first interaction with Europeans was DeSoto, and then of course he just went on a rampage and went on through. But after that, we have treaties back into the 1700s. Which one of the, it's a long, sort of sad and brutal history of those treaties, but essentially we had to give up a lot of land. My family lived in Georgia, and the land we gave up is now represented by Marjorie Taylor Greene, and I'd sort of like to get it back. Or run her out, run them all out. So where should we go from there? I've just gone over into politics.
Yeah.
No, that's good. It's good get me back on track, Oscar.
With regard to like the book world and just natives today representing, there's more of us who are enrolled, who are getting opportunities in the publishing world, and so that's amazing. Especially with this latest renaissance started with Tommy Orange in 2018. So that was
Although I'm not sure Renaissance is the word to use, because that implies that there was something before and it's come back, and I think it's just really new
Yeah.
that the publishing world has been open to native voices. I mean, it's just, it's almost a miracle in, the way that I feel about it, because as Marie said, I tried to get Cherokee America, my second novel, which, has done pretty well, but it was turned down 92 times over, years and years and years. And, basically, people didn't want to read about Indians or didn't understand Indian storytelling, because I think one of the things that you see this in Cherokee America, you certainly see it in Oscar's. Here's Oscar's book right here, which is wonderful, I might add. And you see it in Tommy Orange's work, you see it in almost all Native work, that there is a multitude of characters. And I think the reason for that is that Native people see themselves as part of a community, that we are not individuals by ourselves. We are defined by each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree
in a
with that.
way that you don't see in white writing, and in a way that you don't see in a lot of white living, and that is reflected in this body of work that is coming out of Native, all sorts of tribes, but you see the same pattern. Lots and lots of people, because we are defined by relationship. And that is true of tribal identity as well. It's not just are you well, for the Cherokees we have to be on certain roles or we can't be Cherokees. But we also have to be recognized as Cherokees by other Cherokees. And that is to us, or certainly to me, and I assume to Oscar, more important than anything else, that we can recognize each other. And so that identity is a crucial part of my being. I assume it's a crucial part
Oh yeah, definitely.
of your being.
Yeah.
And I think it grounds, I know that it grounds me in a way that I feel that a lot of other people around me are never grounded. And that's reflected in this literature by these multitude of characters and multitude often of perspectives, which is, I think, a hallmark of this kind of literature.
Yeah, I think that I can even think of Louis Erdrich, Love Medicine. It's similar with that regard. Multiple perspectives, multiple characters coming in, and they're all kind of while there is individuality, but the communal aspect is how we influence each other, determines our identity. And so, I think that's an important aspect of Native literature. And sometimes, for myself, I'm always trying to figure out, it feels very natural for me to have a big cast. And I remember early in my writing career, there's that thread of you have to have specific characters, have one narrative that follows one character, and just trying to negotiate, how do I do that and, maintain a communal kind of feel, whenever readers are reading the book. It does have, like it's an entire community, not just one individual. So still negotiating that with my writing, just to just to pay homage to these different aspects that are, in the book world. Because readers kind of have a certain expectation, and I can see that element. Like I read literature for a certain reason as well. Like I'm a big fan of writing, and but yeah, negotiating those multiple voices is super important. Tommy Orange did it as well. I can't think of a Native writer who hasn't done something like that.
I can't.
But yeah, no, that's it's super important. And just this, like with Cherokee Nation, being that we're the largest tribe in the United States, and I know back in my community, I live in Tahlequah, Oklahoma, and there are many writers there who would love an opportunity to be able to be published by a big publisher, and many talented Cherokee writers, and I think that I'm grateful that the publishing industry is starting to recognize or give those of us from our communities who are enrolled an opportunity to advocate for how we live and how we grew up, and we're seeing more and more of that happening. And so that I think that's good news as well.
Can I jump in here and ask a very specific question to you, which is how, given this interest in the publishing world, which is welcome and wonderful, and this emergence from invisibility, because really that is a crucial question in the experience of the Native American pent-up literature. I want to ask each of you how you either entered very purposefully into the work of writing your specific novels, or did you stumble into this? How did each of you do this? How did each of you decide that you were going to write these novels? How did stealing come to you? Margaret, how did this incredibly multifarious personality who actually straddles the indigenous worlds north and south, how did that come to being? How did these personalities emerge? Would you tell those stories for us?
Well, I think you've asked two questions, and let me answer the second one first. Stealing fell on me out of the sky. I took it sort of as I was taking dictation from this character. I wrote the first paragraph where she's just walking down basically a section line, which I walked down, like 5,000 section lines in my life. I'm sure you have too. And she sees a rooster out in the road, and she sees him walk off, and she admires him. And from the moment she admires the rooster, I know who I'm dealing with. And so I was telling Marie earlier, had I not been, at the time I wrote Stealing, I was traveling back and forth to the UK all the time, just working like a dog. But if I'd been able to just sit at my computer, I could have written it in 2.5 months. It came out so smoothly. But that's unusual. Usually I just have to work like a dog. But your first question is, how did we come? I believe your first question is, how did it well up in us to write like this? And when I was a kid, and my family's from Fort Gibson, which is just 20 miles down the road from where Oscar lives. I knew, and I wish you hadn't asked me this because it just bothers me to talk about it. I knew they were going to kill those people and that they would never be remembered. that was the policy of the United States government, was that they were going to erase them. And it just ate me alive. And I decided, I made a pact with land, really, that I was not going to let them be erased. And I did not know at the time that we would have a Cherokee Nation like we have today. Mm-hmm. Because the whole push of the federal government was to erase them.
Yeah.
And so the fact that we had, the Cherokee Nation is just as vital. You can't imagine how vital it is. If you haven't been out to northeastern Oklahoma, go see how vital it is. I was out there just 3 weeks ago, and in Tahlequah, and I mean, it's the most vital part. I think it's certainly most vital part of the whole state, as far as I'm concerned, and that entire part of the country. But that was unimaginable at the time that I was growing up. And in fact, what they were doing was that the United States government was in violation of our treaty, stealing the sand and gravel from the Arkansas riverbed. And they were running those trucks up our section line and just stealing it. And Earl Board Pierce, my mother's first cousin, was the tribal attorney, I think I mentioned, and he was suing the government about that, of that violation of that treaty. And he sued them for 10 years or so. Went to the United States Supreme Court, and they won several $1 million because they were stealing it, and the court decided in our favor. It took the United States government 20 years to pay that money to the tribe, but it provided the seed money for the Cherokee Nation today. But when I was growing up, we didn't know how that case was going to turn out.
No, I think that's an important point that you make, Margaret, and thank you for doing that and reminding us that there was an era where, like, there was so many different avenues of just telling a tribe that the termination era, where they just show up and say, okay, today you're not a native no more because we want all your timber, and then so all of a sudden this tribe, according to the government anyway, wasn't a tribe anymore, so they could get the timber. Or like where Margaret says that there's a certain type of resource in the land itself that the U.S. government wants to extract, and so they'll just walk up and say, okay, we're going to terminate your tribe now. So there was a long era, and it was pretty intense. And
it's about 70 years.
And so I'm glad you talked about that today, and so it just shows us how important it is for us to have our sovereignty, for us to have a means to fight back for not only our land but our people and the stability of our people. So I work with Indian Child Welfare. The Indian Child Welfare Act gets basically attacked every couple of years. There's always a big national case where there's a threat to essentially eradicate it. So the Indian Child Welfare Act is a time period, there was a time period where natives were being taken from native families and put into white people's homes. And so their ties to the community were severed. And so this was repeatedly happening. So it started back in the boarding school era where kids were taken from families and put into a boarding school. And there was this saying that kill the Indian to save the man. And so that was the boarding school era. After that happened, after they started to see the brutality of boarding school, so that happened up into the 1950s, the boarding school era. And then they started to adopt out. They would adopt native kids out of the community. And so the Indian Child Welfare Act came in so that we would be able to place, if a child did go into foster care, they would be placed with a native child. So if a Cherokee child goes into the system, that we're going to look for a Cherokee family so that child can at baseline stay in the Cherokee community. And so that was threatened this year. There was a ongoing case that was settled in June of this year. And so that infringes on our sovereignty, our ability to govern our own citizens. If the U.S. government comes and said, no, we're not going to abide by the Indian Child Welfare Act anymore. You can't say where an Indian child is supposed to be. So that's telling us, infringing on our sovereignty. Well, we can't say that we want to keep first and foremost this child with the family, and if that doesn't work out, with the tribal member. And so that's another important aspect of that's happening today. Like Margaret had said, that there's more than one way to kill an Indian. And so this is something that's happening now. In a couple of years there'll be another case where they're going to try to threaten that particular act. But it's another aspect of infringing on our sovereignty. But sorry, I didn't mean to go off, but that reminded me of the Indian Child Welfare Act. And but when I first started writing, it was just like just wanting, I was a kid, I was 14 years old, and I started to read, like horror and fantasy genre, and started reading Stephen King, Dean Koontz, Clive Barker. That's everybody calls Stephen King the gateway drug, and it definitely was the gateway drug for me. And but I just fell into the after reading Stephen King, I was fascinated by this world he created. But then I was like, well, I could do that. I can write this world, this fantastic world where these crazy things happen. And so I started to write at 14, and wanting to escape myself, growing up in poverty in a harsh environment, and just wanting a way out. Sometimes my circumstances weren't the best, and so it was an escape for me. And so that's kind of where I started. And I think that for a lot of natives, sometimes we don't get to see ourselves on television. Right now, there's a show called Reservation Dogs. I don't know if anyone here has been watching that, but it's on Hulu. So you should definitely watch it if you haven't. It's very unique television, very unique. But we don't always get to see ourselves in broader media. But oftentimes, I would be able to see myself in writing. So we had an author by the name of Robert J. Conley. He's Cherokee. I don't know if you've heard of him, but he lived in Tahlequah. I think he taught in Kentucky at one point, and but he's from Oklahoma, and he's Cherokee. I think he was in Hokeah, and so I would see him in Tahlequah. Like I would read his books. And for me, as a young person, being able to see another tribal citizen who's a published author made it more real. Like I would see him putting gas in his van, and I'd be like, that's Robert J. Conley gassing up his car. And for me, being like 15 years old, it just blew my mind that he would, be doing something so normal. And so, but it made it more real for me. And so, I just kind of, fell in love with writing from a native perspective. So when I was younger anyway, I would write like native-centric horror fantasy. It's like a dark fantasy type stuff. And it wasn't until I was in my late 20s, the last grade I completed was the 6th grade. So I had, a lot of like anger issues and stuff because, I grew up with an abusive father, one, and then also living in poverty, being frustrated at my circumstances and just had a lot of anger. But last grade I completed was 6th grade. My mother couldn't control me. And we were living in Tahlequah. So she's, essentially sent me to Lawton, Oklahoma, which is where my Kiowa side is at. On my Kiowa side, I had uncles and older cousins who could keep me in line. And I started to work. Like my uncles owned a roofing company. And so all my cousins worked roofing. And so she was like, well, if you're not going to go to school and you're going to run around and act a fool, then you're going to go to work. And so she sent me to my uncles, and they straightened me out, so they were able to control me for sure. And plus, working, I don't know if you worked on a roof before, but that's pretty hard work right there, especially when you're 14 years old. So yeah, the last grade I completed was the 6th grade, and then I got a GED when I was 17, and then didn't go to school. I didn't really think, I was the type who would do well in a classroom setting. And it wasn't until I was 29 that I decided, well, I'm going to give it a shot, because I had moved to Santa Fe, New Mexico from Tahlequah. The Institute of American Indian Arts is in Santa Fe. And so I moved there just to get away from Oklahoma. I was just trying to get out of the environment, and was working at an all-native group home. So all the youth in that group home were Native, Apache, Diné. We had some O'odham kids, and I had some Native staff, Native coworkers, who said, "Hey, we got this creative writing school here in Santa Fe," and I was like, "What? There's a writing school here?" So I had never heard of IAI, which is everybody knows about IAI now. And so they're like, "Well, we want you to sign up," because I showed up to work, and I was like, "Yeah, I'm a writer. I write horror, and I write these Native horror stories." And it took them 2 years to convince me, because I just didn't think I was smart enough. I didn't have that kind of confidence with academic type stuff. So you got to remember, last grade I completed 6th grade. All I have is a GED. And so eventually I said, okay, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to sign up for these writing classes, this writing program. And so after the first semester, I got all A's, and it just blew me away. I was like, I couldn't believe that I had done so well. And so it just empowered me to keep going and keep going. And then so I just kept going as long as I could, and that's where I ended up with the master's degree from the University of Oklahoma. But yeah, so it started for me way back when I was younger and 14 years old, just wanting to escape and wanting to write these fantastical stories. And then eventually when I went to II, I started to read more literary fiction. So I was reading N. Scott Momaday. I started to read more. I knew of Robert J. Conley, but I started to read more of his work. And then also, Louis Serdrick, and also, let's see. So like one of my biggest influences is Alice Munro. If you read my novel, there's certain chapters that you can read and you can see her voice inside of that writing. So she's a big impact on me as a writer, is Alice Munro. And then Marquez was also a big influence as well. And then there's a writer by the name of Isaac Bashevis Singer. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I had an adjunct teacher early on, and he would read some of my work, and he was like, "Have you heard of I.B. Singer?" And I had never heard of him, but he brought me Gimple the Fool. And he said, "Read this." And I just fell in love with it. I was like, man, it felt very Kiowa to me, like the playfulness and the banter and the teasing that happened in the way he writes. It felt very Kiowa. And I was like, man, that is, it feels familiar to me. And so I fell in love with I.B. Singer. And so I think I get a lot of those cultural nuances first came out because of his work. But yeah, so that's how I kind of ended up in literary fiction. I just fell in love with the kind of social justice, like I'm going to advocate for my communities. And so like Maria had mentioned, that I write intertribal, so I write Kiowa and Cherokee specific, so Tahlequah, Lawton, Oklahoma. And for me growing up, I moved back and forth between Cherokee tribe and a Kiowa tribe. And fluidly, I moved back and forth. My mother's half Kiowa, half Cherokee. And my father immigrated from Mexico. And so to me, that was just a natural thing. And so for me to write like that felt very natural. And then also having, in my youth, gone to Mexico, and come back to the United States and traversing the border like that from Oklahoma to Aldama, Chihuahua, Mexico, was also just, was a part of my life. So it felt natural for me to write about that as well. And so I started to include those multicultural intertribal dynamics. So because Oklahoma is 39 different tribes, it's a very Oklahoma thing to have multiple tribes in your lineage. So when I was reading literature, I felt like, okay, that's an aspect that, I'm not really seeing. I'm not seeing the intertribal aspect, and Oklahoma is so intertribal that I felt like I could bring that to the table, and so that's why, and that's the main character in my debut novel traverses those landscapes, and it's very Oklahoma specific, but it also does a little, some of the transnational element. So we start to challenge that border, the U.S.-Mexico border as well, and see some of the tensions that's created just in that kind of corridor right there. But then also showing you the humanity of people in Aldama, Chihuahua, like the heart and the love that comes from the main character's paternal side of his family as well. Whenever we move away from that border, how there's less of that kind of chaos, and so I wanted to capture that element as well. But yeah, I feel like I've kind of. How long was that? Was that like half an hour?
I'm really struck by the.
And then in kindergarten, I was like.
I'm really struck by the very goal-oriented aspect of both of you. I mean, the notion of resuscitating a whole culture, which is hard work. And
well, let me tell you, I can't speak for the rest, all tribes, but the Cherokees, we're all on that, aren't we?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
absolutely. Sure. I mean,
yeah.
It is just everybody is trying to resuscitate Cherokee culture
and doing like
it's
a phenomenal
admirable. It's absolutely
job.
admirable. I'm standing here thinking as you're speaking of the indigenous world that I come from in South America, which was unilaterally wiped out. I mean, wiped out to the extent that nobody identifies themselves as having come from the Inca or from the Moche or from the Guarani. Nobody identifies themselves, and if they do, it's wild. Nobody does that. It's considered eccentric. Christianity had a lot to do with that, wiping out whole belief systems. But I'm struck by this because, for instance, in Peru, where I'm from, the government actually, and the cultural elite, shall we say, the whites, actually promulgate a theory that the Incas must have come from outer space, because nobody who lives on the ground today is anything like that smart. So this is a commonality that is shared up and down the hemisphere, and I'm really struck by that.
Oh yeah,
in
we
speaking.
were not smart enough to do anything.
Right.
We couldn't build mounds or pyramids or anything.
Right.
Not smart enough to do that.
Right.
Yeah.
I want to open this up to questions from the audience. I'm sure we have a lot. Shall we start with Laura over here?
Oh, thank you for the wonderful program. There have been a lot of cultural associations. I, of course, grew up playing Cowboys and Indians. Sports teams took all these logos. We're trying to redress a lot of that. But currently or going forward, do you see or do you hope areas where the cultures are communicating in a more positive way? In my limited knowledge, the environmental movement comes to mind, but are there other arenas where you see a positive relationship going forward?
Did everybody hear that? Laura has a very strong voice. She's a performer herself. But it's, do you see a future, basically? Do you see a good future? Is that, wrap it up. Yeah.
Oh yeah, we're going to prevail. And with our allies.
Yeah.
With allies.
I mean, I see in just everyday community folks, in Oklahoma, like our reservation is very checkerboard. So we're intermixed with everyone, So, but just on the, like that grassroots level, they're, in our everyday interactions, they're typically pretty positive. I mean, there's not any like extreme. I mean, I live in Oklahoma, which is a pretty conservative area, but I don't ever feel like, threatened or anything like that. Like I get along with everybody. I think we get along with each other pretty well, it's just sometimes when it comes to these policies and the government and the policymakers and the governments and the resources, that avenue of it tends to where the contention starts to happen. And but I think when it comes to just like everyday people and we're all going to work and trying to take care of our families, we all understand where we're coming from with each other, and we get along really, really well.
Cherokees are pretty friendly.
Yeah, and we do a lot for the community too. So, and I think that people in the community know that, like they know themselves what we're doing.
Thank you for that question. Over here, this gentleman.
Why, in the light of this, what you're trying to do and the controversies of the past, do you refer to yourself as Indians and not Native Americans?
Why do you refer to yourself as an Indian as opposed to a Native American?
Well, I guess the term most used I hear these days is Native. Like, well, are you Native, or I'm Native, or as I think it's just generationally certain terms. Like Indian is a term that was used at one point, just that generation used it quite a bit. And then I think Native American, even Native American was used for a time period. But I think in a casual kind of way, whenever we're just talking with each other, the term we tend to use is Native. But I think it's a generational, just depends on the generation, on the terms we use.
You know, Native American has always sort of puzzled me because how many of you have had family here, like for 7 or 8 generations here in the United States? Can you raise your hand? Raise it up high. I can't see very well. Okay, so what are you if you're not a Native American? You know, I don't know. And the terminology, you know, one of the first things I got to ask when I got a contract up in New York was, well, now what terms should we use? And I was just told out in Denver the other day that I couldn't use Native or Native American or Indian. I had to use indigenous. And, you know, the linguistics of it, to me, is not the important thing. The important thing is the, well, actually, the important thing is the land. The land, yeah.
I've actually spoken at universities where the person has come to me before I take the microphone and said, we do not use the word Indian. We use the word indigenous here, so please limit yourself to that. And, you know, in my world, you say indio. You say, soy indio. So it felt very strange being told what to call oneself.
Yeah,
Over here.
Yeah, I find it strange.
Yeah. Over here, back here in the pink.
My question, and I have a second question after it has to do with nomenclature, which I'm not clear on whether it's coming more from the white society, the Anglos, or from the Indian population at large. Because what I see is, you know, from a public relations standpoint, some of these big, you know, the sports teams, whatever, and the logos, that's been changed, no argument. But when it comes down to a residential community in a town, and they want to change or get rid of the name Indian, I've not been clear on what the purpose of that is or would be, because there's no education behind that. There's just changing the name. And I don't know whether you've run into these things or not, and what your opinion on that level would be. And this is going to be a little odd, but my second question is, if you choose as a tribe, an independent tribe in Oklahoma, you have to abide by the state laws. So let me give you a specific, and can you get an abortion on your land?
Okay, 2 questions, 2 unrelated questions, but I will try to frame them. Did you hear them?
I did. Did you?
Okay. Okay, the first question has to do with naming and changing a name. To what extent do you agree with the fact that, well, I assume you're talking about, for instance, the Washington Redskins, that sort of thing. It does-
Yeah, like a high school.
Yeah.
with a high school or whatever, yeah. Or a street.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the second question has to do with abortion. And did you hear that question as well?
I did. I'm going to let Oscar have that because he lives in Tahlequah and I don't live in Tahlequah. I'll take the first question though. Look, as long as we're talking about linguistics, as long as we're talking about, well, let's use this word, or let's use this word, or let's use this word. We're not talking about anything that actually makes any difference to Indians or natives or whatever you want to call the people. I personally get really tired of let's talk about linguistics, because we really need to be talking about land and resources and, you know, whose land are we sitting on and what are we going to do about reparations for that. But so I see all of that kind of, well, let's change these names. It's just like, let's don't really deal with the real issues. Let's don't talk about what happened. And you.
And now,
Yeah.
Oscar?
Yeah, no, I think that, you know, there's a multitude of issues that happen in Native communities, and so there are individuals who take on the Native mascot or Native naming element, and so that's their thing, they're activists for that reason, and there's other issues, you know, that other individuals will take on different, like, you know, because I'm a social worker, I always paying attention to the Indian Child Welfare Act, what's going on in the, you know, national discourse with regard to that. So we all have different things that we feel is important, and so that, you know, the Native naming mascot element is, there's certain individuals who are, you know, championing, you know, changing of that kind of narrative that's out there. So I know, I just think that it just depends on the community, like what the discourse is, and I think overall, I think their mindset is that it can feel derogatory or dismissive to a certain degree, especially when you get the more extremes are easy to name. I mean, like Redskins, you know, that's obviously demeaning. But then I think they're just trying to change the overall discourse or overall narrative. That's probably part of it. I don't really get behind. I mean, I get behind it, but I don't like, you know, like I'm not there every day with that particular issue, so I don't know in depth as far as what's going on there.
That's good enough.
And then with, I'm not sure. I've not heard of any kind of abortions happening on, or that issue even coming up on the Cherokee Reservation. Right now, we just had, you know, our reservation boundaries were established with the McGirt ruling, and then there's another one that's more Cherokee specific, and I can't think of the name of it right now. But the McGirt one is the one everyone's talking about, and so it establishes our boundaries as a Cherokee reservation, so that we're taking on. The idea is that we take on more of the cases involving Cherokee children that happen in that space. And so building the capacity to do so is our main objective right now. We don't have the resources, so we're trying to build the resources to take on more responsibility. So I think that's where we're at, but I haven't heard yet about anything abortion-wise.
And Oscar is very deeply involved in the community issues, as he said admirably. So can we have a question from you?
Yes. A number of years ago, I wrote a book called The Lynchings in Duluth.
On what? I'm sorry.
The Lynchings in Duluth, Minnesota.
The lynchings in Minnesota.
As a result of that, I was involved with touring the state and discussing racial issues. And I was struck by the comment from a Native woman who lived in Bemidji, Minnesota, which is quite far north of the state. And she got up and said that she had a 100% heard this, that in order to be enrolled, you had to be 1/4 blood. But apparently, I don't know if it was just Minnesota, but they had to be enrolled in a band, not just the tribe, but the band. And this because a lot of these bands were so small, her granddaughter didn't meet a 1/4 blood total in any band, and thus was not able to register at all. And her follow-up comment, this older woman, was what the government was trying to do 200 years earlier,
Right.
getting rid of all of us, is beginning to happen. She said nobody knows about this.
Thank you for that question. So the question for everybody else, because I think you probably heard it,
Yeah.
is about enrollment. And the gentleman who has written a book on the lynchings in Minnesota was interviewing people in Minnesota and learned that somebody had a native granddaughter who was unable to be enrolled because there was a certain blood quantum of quarter, I think, of native blood that needed to be reached, and perhaps even not only within a tribe, but within a band. So,
I think the easy answer to that goes back to what we were talking about earlier about sovereignty. Each tribe decides on their own what the qualifications for membership are. Qualifications for Cherokees are one thing, qualifications for Ojibwe or something else, for Apache or something else. The tribes decide. The United States government does not decide, the tribes decide. And so whatever that situation was specific to that particular tribe and their criteria for being a member of that tribe. And so that's confusing to a lot of people who are not enrolled citizens of tribes. But every tribe has their own criteria. So that's what she was coming up against.
Yeah. And then so because of that some tribes will say like a quarter is the cutoff limit. And so it just depends on the size. Like for Cherokee Nation, it's direct descendancy. You just have to be related to an individual who was enrolled or on the rolls, the Dawes rolls. But some tribes, and so, I mean, we're the largest tribe in the United States, and we have the capacity to care for those citizens. So if you have a small tribe, like you mentioned, the small band, if they lowered that amount, the number of citizens that comes into the picture for them to take care of starts to jump, and they might not have the resources to care for them. So I like direct descendancy myself. The Kiowa tribe, had a quarter. Whenever I was born, you had to be at least a quarter in order to enroll. Now I think it's an eighth. But that was after a long period of time. They decided to go an eighth. So I think that sometimes some tribes will look at it like, we want to include more, but do we have the resources? Every tribe has a different set of resources. And so if they have the capacity to care for that many citizens, then they can lower it, or they can go to direct descendancy. But if a tribe is small and they go directly to direct descendancy, then all of a sudden they have 100,000 members, and they don't have the resources to care for them. So that's that's part of the dynamics that's at play there.
thank you, Oscar. I'm sorry to say that we've run up against the end of the program. These wonderful authors, please, let's give them a hand.
Thank you.
Wonderful representatives of their people, and I hope that you will go and buy their books. I've read both of their most recent books, and they're astonishing. You really need to read them. They will be signing books after this. You have a wonderful day ahead, and a wonderful day ahead tomorrow. So please enjoy. Thank you so much for joining us. And lunch is beyond the doors. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.